And so I wanted to think about one game that I think is incredibly colonialist in its approach, and this is Animal Crossing. You know, you're a little human being that lands on an island with a bunch of, you know, primitive indigenous characters on it that bizarrely speak your language. And then you get to sort of enrich yourself, you get to, you know, build a house, and then you get to strip the land of all of its resources, and everyone still is very nice to you all the time. And then eventually when you're rich enough, you get to build yourself a boat, and then you get to do it to other islands as well. It's really fun, it's really cute, and yeah, it's lovely. Colonialism is fun. Actually during the pandemic, Keza MacDonald here from The Guardian, she wrote, Animal Crossing is the escape we all need right now, which is nice. And we all needed that, and I actually enjoyed playing Animal Crossing too. I'm not saying it's a bad game. But it's interesting how she wrote that it's a simple existence on a deserted island. I found that fascinating because there's a bunch of creatures on there that speak your language. But just because they're not human, does that make it a desert? And again, that seems to mirror very much the sort of attitude that all these great conquistadors over the ages have had towards other lands, foreign lands. If it's not, doesn't look like me, it is essentially doesn't really have a right to exist or a right to its own independence. And then there's Pikmin, of course. I'm now portraying Shigeru Miyamoto as the world's most colonialist game designer, clearly, where you as a human being crash land on a primitive planet with your superior white man technology, and your superior spaceship falls apart into little bits, and you then feel entitled to blow a whistle and tell all these primitive indigenous characters to gather all the stuff for you, die in the way as well. Sometimes you have to sacrifice a few of these good helpers, you know, in order to, you know, restore your great spaceship again. It's quite interesting that the game is called Pikmin, and here's a picture of pygmies, actually, in Africa, who also happen to have leaves on their heads. And of course, I'm sure that that Shigeru Miyamoto didn't necessarily mean to copy that, because he was talking that he was inspired by ants when he made his game, but I don't think ants listen to whistles. There is a lot of sort of hidden sort of language in games where we take it for granted that we get to tell NPCs, non-playable characters, what to do. We treat them as non-people. And for instance, even there's a character that was actually called the Wollywog in Pikmin, which actually is strangely resembles the word gollywog, which was a racist doll that the Brits were selling for a while. It's quite insidious. If you think about it, the more you think about it, you can go crazy, but maybe I am crazy and I'm just reading too much into everything. But here, also very interesting, there was a bad ending in the first Pikmin game. So when you finish the first Pikmin game, you have to either collect all the bits of the spaceship, and if you don't manage to get all of them, then you get 3 different endings. And the worst ending was one. I'll read it here. It says, lastly, failing to reclaim the 25 required parts for the final day results in the worst ending. Olimar crash lands back onto the planet, succumbs to oxygen poisoning, and is taken by several Pikmin to be placed into an onion, which converts him into a Pikmin Hokotation hybrid. So basically, he then becomes a hybrid between a Pikmin and a human. So interracial relationships in this case are considered to be the worst possible ending that could ever happen. So thank you, Nintendo. So sorry to be so serious at this at a game conference, because we're here to have fun. But I had this other realization, you know, and I'm looking at this room, and still, and this is not, you know, anyone's fault. You know, most of the industry, most of the leadership in this industry is still 70% men and 70% white men, actually. And I was at Reboot Develop Blue at a conference in October last year in Croatia. I was in a bus, I was sitting next to Frédéric Grenal, and we're sitting there, and the bus was so far. Actually, this was what it sounded like. We couldn't hear anything. It was just a bunch of shouty white men, and I'm one right now on stage, which is kind of hypocritical, but anyway. And I realized that indeed this is what we sound like. We make white noise. That's what we create. That's our output. That's our main output at the moment. And that is thanks to this great thing that this great white man invented, apparently. Just technology, because, you know, like this great white man here. We have built our industry entirely thanks to technology, and to many, many of you also consider yourselves tech people, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But with that power that we have, comes great responsibility, and I don't believe that we're necessarily taking it. But first, if we're going to talk about tech and how it came about, and it's all thanks to great white men, of course, we can start with this one here, Adam, who out of his rib made a woman. So apparently that's how that happened. And then they had some children, Cain and Abel. I didn't have photos of them, so I had to, use some video game references on that one. And then, one of them killed the other, and then he did like a victory dance. So he invented video games, I think, back then. And these are the different ages, different stages of tech that have allowed us to get to this great place that we're in right now. We had prehistory. It's before history because these monkeys didn't deserve to have history, so this was before history existed. And then we had ancient history, in which we invented metal. Then we had the Middle Ages. Then we sort of invented some sort of first sort of machines and the printing press and things like that. This is when we still read books. And then we have modern history, in which we did, factories, and then we put children in them, and then we replaced them with robots, and then we blew everyone up. So that's, I mean, I'm not a historian, but yeah. And then also, like, we had rockets as well, which is quite exciting. We had this guy here on the left. He was a Nazi, and then he became the head of NASA. There's a very fine line between the two, apparently. And there's this really great song by Tom Lehrer about Wernher von Braun, which was, don't say that he's hypocritical, don't say instead that he's apolitical. Once the rockets are up, who cares where they come down? That's not my department, says Wernher von Braun. And that's very much how video games operate. Or this great man here, who is now the leader of everything, Elon Musk, who sent his Tesla into space. What a great hero he is. I think he was probably inspired by the guy before that, but I don't want to make any direct connections on links between this fascist X and the other thing. Anyway, then we invented the internet. This is the most important thing that ever existed on the internet. That's the sneezing panda. He still has had more views than any of our games will ever have, so he wins. The age of information came about. I believe it should be called the age of attention, because information no longer exists, at least reliable information. So the only thing that matters is for you to get attention at all costs. And there's a word for this thing that we all now make. I have on my shirt. It's content. Everything that we make is content. We are content. Our children are content on Facebook and on Instagram. Everything is content. And I was at Gamescom last year, and there was this really crazy moment for me, because I was there with my game, The Last Worker, lots of interviews all day, etc. And there was a TikTok booth, I think it was TikTok, a few steps away from us, and it said, "We bring your content to life." So basically, what we create is dead things. We create dead things that the great tech companies then put some sort of life into, and then they become undead, apparently. So we, and the other thing that I saw when I was walking around was these huge booths, these massive mega booths for AAA games, especially Call of Duty, etc. And indies were all crammed into a place called Indie Arena Booth. So all of the indies of the world had one booth, and all the AAA games had single booth filled entire hallways. So it was a ghetto. It was a content ghetto that was created for indie games at Gamescom. And so I realized that Gamescom is basically like the world's biggest ice cream shop, the biggest supermarket. And the only thing they sell in there is ice cream. So content to me is this sort of thing that we have to fill someone else's bucket with. It doesn't have an identity of its own. So we very much have also been colonized by platforms and digital corporations, and indeed tech companies, and we're treated as non-things. We don't really have an existence of our own. We just fill their shit bucket. So content is a bit of a con at the moment. It's an attention-seeking data pack, and that's what we're all being reduced to. If you don't get attention, you don't exist. And that's what a toddler does. But we always tell our kids, it's not all about getting attention. Just, be patient, wait, no, become a good human being, say thanks, We're all being reduced to toddlers. This is what we do now. Content is king, as they say. Here's some kings of content. They're the ones who win because they've been the ones who've been getting the most attention over the last couple of years, and therefore they are clearly the best at what they do. But since we are here, right? We are technically the kings of the world right now, right? I mean, we have gamified the entire world. Our medium is the leading cultural medium in the world. There's nothing more powerful than games. There's nothing that takes up more time than games. In some countries as well, it even runs the entire political system. And your citizen points are graded the way you get, points inside a video game. You even can play Doom in your pregnancy test now. Ironically, this was posted on a website called Fatherly, which is hilarious. Anyway, and the other thing that we're being reduced to, and this is also quite relevant to the theme of colonialism, is that we are being sold games as a form of escapism, as if we all had to escape from where we live, as if we all had to be refugees, as opposed to actually love where we live and travel somewhere instead. We're being made to escape to places that hate us, that want to kill us. I love this game, by the way. And this is being injected into us like a drug. And then we've got brands, which have also completely colonized the entire ecosystem. And we're being told that brands is what we want. We've got all the biggest branded entertainment everywhere. The thing about brands is that they're familiar, they're risk-averse. Now we have them all crowding into spaces called the metaverse. And but my thing is, this feeling, right, of being delighted, being surprised by something, is an essential feeling that I think we want to pursue as entertainers, as actors, as writers, as creator of entertainment. We want to delight, we want to surprise. In a horror game or in a horror film, when you get scared, you didn't see it coming, right? Whether it's a jump scare or whether it's a feeling you didn't think you would have. That's what makes it so horrific. In a comedy, you laugh at jokes that you didn't see coming. That feeling of delight. But if everything is based on brands, then you already, on the top level, remove that element of surprise. The familiar kills off the element of surprise. And when you do that, then suddenly you kill delight. And we are gradually doing it. Familiarity breeds contempt was something that William Shakespeare, another great white man apparently, said. But I believe that it breeds content. That's what content is. We want to make everything more and more and more familiar because that's what the people want. And so we're addicted to it. We're addicted to content everywhere. We can't get enough of it, but at the same time, we don't necessarily get satisfied by it anymore as a species. We're addicted to boredom, that feeling of constantly having to have another hit, another hit, another hit, but we never really truly feel the enjoyment of it. Interestingly, to this day, we're still playing Tomb Raider. I mean, in the AAA space, 30 years after the first Tomb Raider came out, we're still playing the same game. You're invading a space as an explorer. You walk around in it, you sort of kill everything that tries to kill you. Sometimes you kill everything anyway. You strip it of all of its resources, fill your backpack, etc. You're essentially colonizing other spaces. But that game has now been automated to a point where every AAA third-person game essentially has the same controls. It is a process in which we are now controlling humans in AAA content like we control cars. We have standardized controls for humans in story-driven games. And we want to make them bigger and better and faster and more, but essentially what we're doing, we now see big AAA games that cost about $200, $300 million that are still repeating the same gameplay mechanics that we've been playing for the last 3 decades. We're killing delight, but we're also making people expect more and more production value, which is also inflating the industry, which has colonized the industry and the way games are made to a point where game developers and indie game developers and others are now suffering. Interesting, Tomb Raider has also gone through many iterations. And this was an interesting thing that I read on Reddit the other day. how actually in the beginning Tomb Raider, according to this really smart writer on Reddit, and it was on Girl Gamers, wrote about Tomb Raider and how it actually is suddenly becoming more colonialist in its approach, as it pretends to be more and more open. I can make that quote later. I don't want to read it to you guys now, but we are ultimately being told, without thinking about it, to control characters that are imperialist in their attitude towards the spaces that they invade. But of course, none of this is political, because, you know, when Far Cry 6 came out, Monsieur Guillemot and others said that their games are not political. So even though you make a game set in Cuba and with dictators and you get to assassinate people, it's clearly not political in any way, and how dare you accuse them of such a thing. Descartes, of course, said, "I think, therefore I am." Guillemot potentially might be saying, "I play, therefore I don't think." And that's where we are now in the AAA sort of mega game space. And we interact with NPCs. A friend of mine, a dear friend, Chantal Ryan, who I also do a podcast with, she's a great game designer in Australia, also head of Women Leaders in Games, an ambassador. She did this great thing in her game, Dark Web Streamer. It's coming out next year, in which she said, you know, she refuses to call characters NPCs. She calls them NPPs, non-playable persons. Because by telling all of the people that are working on a game to call them NPPs, suddenly you have empathy towards them. You start to worry about what your effects on the characters in your game might be. You actually respect them as characters with agency, as people, as persons, rather than just another thing that you might shoot or discard at will. So non-playable persons is something I encourage you to remind yourself of when you make your games. It will make your games better. So we are all being made to be space invaders. We are the space invaders, not the ones coming from the top of the screen. We are the space invaders. We're invading the alien space, actually, and killing them all. And then there's, of course, IP. The idea of property, which is interesting. First of all, most games aren't intellectual at all. And then there's this false idea of property in the game industry. We work with an indie publisher. So you get to keep your IP. Don't worry, you get to keep your IP. Sure, but can I eat too? Yeah, we might own it, so to speak, but ultimately the money is entirely held on the other side. And it's completely imbalanced, because you have to give them 50% after they've recouped their risk, and the risk that you've put into it, which is time, is not validated really. So yeah, we are making apparently these things that are for sale that are non-intellectual properties. And then we are also living in a time now when games that used to be all about discovery are also filled with tutorials, like the one I did in the very beginning. So even now when you play the latest sort of Quake and Doom games, you know, even before you face a boss, you're being shown a screen by default telling you how to defeat it, which again robs the delight of it. I believe that we have to put meaning behind the mechanics in our games, because actually, as we've seen also with Far Cry 6, they already have meaning to begin with. But we need to start thinking about the meaning behind the mechanics in our games, because games are about gameplay. They're not about narrative. I'm a filmmaker. I tell stories, but I've realized that if I disassociate and if I divorce the mechanics of my game from the storytelling, then the stories are just a lie. I'm gaslighting audiences into thinking that my thing is about something profound, when in fact the mechanics are telling an entirely different story. The other thing that we are being bandied with a lot in this industry is the term of killing time. The fact that, oh, I'm going to play some games and kill some time. Well, killing time is an act of murder. You know, we're currently at a time in history where time is becoming more and more precious, where people are being killed for no reason and murdered in the masses. And you know, the sea levels are rising, fascism is rising in a lot of countries, and the idea to kill time, just spend hours and hours doing nothing, and sort of repeating some sort of weird old capitalist and imperialist ideas with the joypad, feels wrong to me. That doesn't mean that we can't have fun. But let's please have fun, but do it in a meaningful way. Because I'm not content with the state of things. And also, I don't want to escape, because I don't have a fucking cock rocket like this guy. I'm stuck here. So I want to make the best of it. And since we are so powerful as a medium and so omnipresent, let's use this power. I had this thing about the overview of which I won't do, but because I would have to go to the computer and read the notes. Unless, tu peux mettre les notes sur l'écran? Non, c'est pas possible, non? It's not possible. So I really encourage you to read this thing by William Shatner called, where he actually spent some time on Jeff Bezos's cock rocket, because he flew into space with him. And Bezos wanted to pose with him for a photo, and if you look at the photos after it, you know, William Shatner didn't look particularly happy. Because once he arrived in space, he realized this dream that he had been selling to us with Star Trek for so many years felt really, really depressing to him. He was up there and he realized that he loved planet Earth, and that he felt a sense of responsibility for fellow human beings that he had never felt before. And that's called the overview effect. It's a psychological thing that once you take a step back from something, and in this case, he took the biggest step you can take, he realized, wow, shit, I don't want this. I don't want to be up here. I have to be down there and I have to do good things. And this is where it brings me to platforms. Platforms, you know, publishing platforms, distribution platforms, tech platforms. They're an interesting thing because platforms are oh, this is Jeff Bezos here. Trying to help a fellow man up the, oh, sorry. Wrong video, clearly. The idea of platforms is interesting because we should stand on top of them. But they don't allow us to stand on top of them. They're crushing us at the moment. And we have to hold them up with our content. We are content providers to them, but we're not being treated like fully fledged life forms. Even after we finish the game, we are vying for attention the way a spermatozoid tries to vie for life. It may never make it there. And that's how they see us. Even when you get funded by a platform, by a hardware platform, by a game company, you might never even be treated as a thing that's worth pushing and promoting unless you have enough clicks or enough sort of likes or enough Steam wish lists, etc. It's quite crazy. So, you know, we're not even their children. We're just spermatozoids. And we're being pushed into something called the content pipeline. That's what they call it as well. So we make oil. We're just greasing some big engine of attention at the moment. And this brings me to the subject of tools. To a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And we are being currently ruled by tool companies. The tools own us. The tech companies own us as opposed to us owning the tools. It's upside down at the moment, the relationship. And when people tell me, oh yeah, but games are unique because they're tech, you know, games are tech and they use tech. I'm like, every single piece of art that's ever been created has used tech in some shape or form. Starting with the first cave painting. You know, someone had to invent the flame. Someone had to know how to recreate that fire and that flame reliably inside a cave. They had to have brushes and scraping tools and other things to make it. And the tools have all disappeared. We don't know what exact tools they were using at the time, but the art remains. So we've always used tech since the very beginning of time. Because we're tech animals. That is the spider web that we weave. That is our extension in the world. This is how we really, truly communicate. So tech is natural. It's natural to us. It's not something that Bezos and Zuckerberg and everyone should behold above us, like as if they were some sort of gods with their clouds. We should be using what they make as tools, and we should also treat them as such, with respect. And code is a language. We call it a programming language. It's a form of communication. And therefore, what we program is also a form of communicating and saying something. We need to start speaking through the art of code and through the language of code, as opposed to just seeing it as a tool that automates standardized things that we've been seeing done over and over again. I think we should stop killing time. I think we should start filling time with meaning. I think we need to do things with intent rather than just making content. Because intent is original. If you have something to say, if you have something that you really want to express from your soul, that is the thing that will make your game unique. That is the thing that will make it stand out from all the other look at me generic nonsense that's being made. It's powerful to have something to say. And that doesn't mean you have to say it with words. You can say it with mechanics. You know, Pikmin, for instance, you know, is a great game. I'm not saying it's not a great game, but it wouldn't have been any worse if the Pikmin at some point decided to rebel and say no. It wouldn't be any worse if at some point the Pikmin, you know, after you take off in your spaceship, just went like, finally, he's gone. It's same with Animal Crossing. That a bit of questioning of the mechanics that you're doing do not make it worse. The mechanics can remain the same, but I need to feel some sort of meaning and some sort of reflection from the game designers as to what they're actually making, what they're making you do. And intent is marketable because you get to talk about these stories. You get to actually, when people talk to you, it's like, oh, it's another roguelite pixel shooter thing and whatever. No, you can talk, this game is about this. And then suddenly people will be talking about your game outside of video game circles. Journalists will talk about it, you know, people who are into politics, people who are into music. Talk about the intent behind the games. Put that at the very center of the games that we make. The communities is another term that's been usurped by tech companies into meaning, you know, content creation accumulation. They're competing, they're setting us against each other into competing sort of mechanics. It is an incredibly, it's a false term at the moment, the idea of community, because we're actually being ghettoized into interest groups as opposed to genuine communities of diverse communities that may be into a whole different set of things. The community should be about collaboration and communication and compassion. That's a community. And diversity really falls into that. And the other thing that really is really important to me as well, as we sort of keep regenerating the same ideas all the time, we lose track of the people that created these things originally, to begin with. For instance, I'm working with Frédéric Renal on a project, and he created the survival horror genre with Alone in the Dark. And he's one of the inventors of our medium. You know, he had the first real-time 3D human character in the video game that you could control in that game as well. And he's alive. Like, he's here. Like, you know, this is the first time in history where an art medium actually has its pioneering inventors there, right there, ready for you to talk to. Because he hasn't repeated himself. He hasn't made that game again. He could have continued making another Alone in the Dark and another one forever and ever. He could have done, and he would have made him better one each time, but he hasn't repeated himself at all. But he is here, he has asked himself all of these questions at the very beginning of time. Talk to these great people that are still among us. Talk to the Shakespeares of our industry, because they're here. We're very lucky to know that they're here around us, and we have a lot to learn from them. And to me, the other thing that we also have to understand, games are not digital. We may be using digital tools to express them, but they make you feel things. Sometimes they make you move. You know, the first time I was really feeling that I wanted to make games was when I sat down inside Outrun in 1986. And my feet could barely touch the pedals. I was 8 years old. It was in Brussels, actually. And it made me feel things that I didn't know were possible. And I was traveling to these amazing places. Games are physical. Think about physicalizing your games. We can do it with VR now. But what do you want to make people feel? What do you want to make them think? How do you want to make them move? So let's be intent creators. Let's put meaning behind our mechanics. Let's stand on top of the platforms rather than letting them crush us. And on that note, this is coming out next week, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, you know? I mean, amidst all the shit that's happening right now, I imagine the poor souls now working in the marketing departments having to go like, yeah, Modern Warfare, buy it. And the thing that's crazy about this is that this, you know, the Call of Duty games have been made in collaboration with people who've been even mercenaries and arms manufacturers and a lot of very interesting types of people over the years. And I'm not okay with that anymore. I don't want to ban these games, obviously not. But what I find crazy is that we're injecting this content into people's bloodstreams and into their brains, but they're not even aware of the context in which these games were made. When you buy a pack of cereal, you want to look at the sugar content on the back, and you can still make a decision on whether you want to buy this sugary cereal or not. I eat shitty sugary cereal sometimes, but I am given the choice to decide whether I want to eat it or not. With a pack of cigarettes, I can decide whether I want to get cancer or not, potentially. I personally would love there to be just one little sticker on there that puts it into context, that makes me understand that this game was made in collaboration with arms makers, or manufacturers, or even murderers. Because it will make you think. At the point of entry, instead of actually turning on the console and immediately turning off the brain, you'll understand, okay, shit, all right. Well, how does this then recontextualize what I'm doing? What I'm actually being made to do by this game? I invite you all to listen to my podcast with Chantal. It's called Directional. We're talking to some amazing people. Also, I'd love to have some of you in there. We have some amazing guests, and we'd like to talk about the meaning behind games and what we can do, how we can use games to change the world, actually. Our impact is so huge. So please subscribe and listen to it, etc. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Jörg, for this very unusual analysis of our video game industry, but I think it's important to speak about that. But I have sometimes the impression that it's just the nature of the things since the world is world. Big creatures are eating smaller creatures. We have you mentioned Call of Duty. We have an acquaintance in common. I say acquaintance, not friend, Bobby Kotick, with the CEO, for those who don't know the most famous villain in our industry. But it's now bought by Activision, is bought by Microsoft. So a bigger villain, but not from the video game industry originally, at least. So there are now some activities in the video games for a while. How can we change that? It's just an evolution of the system. And I think that all these platforms and big companies then don't make games for players and make games for consumer. And they are not working for the players, they're working for the shareholders. So that's the industry. So how can we change that? Because we can create games for players as indie studio, but we still need money.
Yeah, absolutely good question. I think in the film industry went through a very similar phase. It's like when you take a look at the film industry in the 60s, it was making a lot of garbage, and it was losing, like we are now starting to, it was losing viewers, it was using audiences. They built all these big cinemas everywhere, and suddenly people stopped going. And then suddenly you had a few sort of rebels within Hollywood that decided, you know what, let's just do something else. You had Spielberg, you had Lucas, you had a few Coppola, who decided to make big entertainment with meaning. They changed everything. Suddenly they were bringing auteur sensibilities into big, massive entertainment, and they were hugely successful with it. And now is the time that we do this in games as well. Whether you're working on an indie scale or on a large scale, like if you put meaning behind the stuff, more people will want to engage with it. And also having these conversations. I mean, I was wearing this shirt, meeting with heads of PlayStation and Sega and other companies at Gamescom, because they look at me strange. They're like, "What do you mean?" And I was talking to them. Listen, like I want to make stuff that matters together, because you guys are fucking laying off hundreds of people right now. Because it doesn't matter. They don't matter to you. The stuff that you make doesn't matter to anyone. So let's change little by little. And also, you don't get to call what I make content. I've actually put that into a clause with one of the publishers I work with. I put that if you call my game content, the contract is void. I don't want to be referred to it as dehumanizing. I'm not here to fill anyone else's fucking bucket. The thing that I make has an identity of its own. It has something to say. I will put years of my life into it. Fuck you. Don't call it that. So I think it is a step. Like, I don't know if we're going to change anything. Maybe we'll always just be confined to having a few people have resonant voices in history. but I think we have to try. And right now, one thing I do know for sure is that tech does not own me, and I will never let it. I will not be owned by anyone else. That is a fucked up, way to be treated and to live. I'm not going to be anyone else's bitch. And this is how most of us are currently behaving. Oh yeah, sure, 30%. Oh yeah, and of course I'll get you some wish lists. And yeah, sure. And it's like it's a very strange dynamic right now, and we need to get the confidence to know that no, we are culture, we are artists, we are the most powerful, cultural, resonant, important voices right now. We are making people do things. Like we are making people do things in a very passive world, a consumerist world. We are the ones that actually make people interact with things. So let's use that power and let's make them think.
So you gave very good insights for developers and the students in the room and startup studios. But what about these players? How can we better educate them? And what do you think by using then good example video games in schools and educating first the teachers to educate correctly the children? Where, for example, here in the venue in Cadiz, the first gaming zone open all the year long with monthly new mostly indie games presented, and with yearly thousands of students coming along. But it's something unique in Belgium, probably in Europe. So is that the kind of tools that we can use to educate then first the teachers? Because when the teachers are coming here, they are learning more than the kids, because the kids already knows video games in general. Maybe not video games as a media and with all the content, and maybe not some interesting indie games, and that's what we are trying to show them. But educating teachers is also very important. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, the idea of games being toys is now, they're more than toys. And a lot of educational facilities have dismissed games as just a sort of silly pastime, as entertainment for the longest time. It's maybe most of them are, but the fact that they are taking up so much time of children's and adults' time means that they are too significant to be ignored as something that is merely a consumerist throwaway thing. So I think integrating it into culture, indeed into politics, but not in a way of actually controlling masses, but in terms of actually educating politicians about the incredible impact and importance of games. And it's happening. I mean, you have amazing funding for games more and more in Belgium here. In the UK, like the British Film Institute, for instance, has the Global Screen Fund, which is now, even though it's the British Film Institute, they are now encouraging international collaborations between game developers. This is very exciting to me as well, because the idea of just being in a little silo, one team of like people huddled together in one location is no longer necessary. We can make games with global people, truly diverse teams. We can construct teams out of the best people from all over the world and share stories with each other. And this is not possible with film. Like with film, you have to fly them physically over, get them all to the set. It's very expensive to do that. With games, we can make truly diverse cultural items that matter and that resonate in the world. And so, yes, education is important. And I work a lot with schools, and I talk to kids, and it's amazing what ideas they have. But you almost have to give people the permission to be original. You almost have to tell them it's okay. You don't have to make another copy of the other thing. And once that happened in film as well, cinema got better, and that was thanks to those people at the end of the 60s, when it said, everything has been so completely commercialized to a point where it doesn't matter anymore. Let's reinvent it. And I think now is the time for us to do this, thanks to the tools. But
you made a comparison with the film industry, but also from the beginning mostly recognized as a cultural sector. What's not the case of video game. With in Belgium, in Brussels, an institution, the European Commission, they're making laws for hundreds of millions of inhabitants in Europe, and they still don't recognize the video games as a cultural, but only as a product. I think that if we want to change these laws to get access to the same kind of public funding than video games, it has to change on the top.
It does, but it's very difficult when people like, Jim Ryan from PlayStation flies over to Brussels, not to defend games as a cultural item, but to defend PlayStation's right to Call of Duty. This is literally what happened in the last few months. And what are people in Brussels going to say? Okay, so the most important thing that one of the biggest players in the game industry cares about is to have the shoot brown people in the face game on his system as well. Is it culture? Fuck no. It's not. Like, so we are representing it wrong. So we have to talk to our industry leaders as well to represent us better. And it's difficult in a time when horrible wars are being, where people are being, where genocide is happening, where people are being killed en masse. And, you know, one of the biggest players in the industry buys not the nicest player in the industry for $65 billion, and thus elevates, you know, a game that is all about violence, all about objectifying humans, all about the binary relationship of kill or be killed. If that is elevated to the highest echelon of business, then of course, no, we're not culture. We're killing it. And on top of that, Microsoft, of course, has done a multi-billion-dollar deal in which they're selling, you know, AR headsets to the US military, while at the same time not actually supporting VR game development. So the business of war is actually more important than the business of delight at the moment. So we're not acting like a cultural medium at the moment.
Great. We can continue for hours, but are there some questions in the audience?
I have a question about, like, why do you think that most studios in the industries are, like, currently, like, more focused on, like, content stuff like intent, when, like, I would look at, like, some of the games, like, from, like, Naughty Dog or, like, from, like, Larian Studios, like, they're, like, more focused on, like, intent, like, they are, like, way more, or, like, they feel way more successful and, like, positively received than, like, others.
Well, Naughty Dog is an interesting one. I mean, Last of Us 2, there was an interview actually that Neil Druckmann gave, I think it was in the New Yorker or somewhere, I believe a year ago, and he, you know, he's from the West Bank originally, Israeli, and he was talking about how his inspiration behind the game was Palestine versus Israel, and that he really wanted to express the hatred that he feels, or that one feels in this game. I was like, okay then, that's nice. But as the game has this whole sort of projection of a story on top of something that ultimately is about killing everything, and again, dehumanizing humans that are no longer human because they're zombies now. And there's a story on top of that. But again, it's Tomb Raider. I'm playing a game that I've been playing for a long, long time. The fact that it's super successful is because it's fucking well made. It's an incredibly well produced game. Like, it's a great game, of course. But I am interested in an alternative to this kind of stuff now. If you pump $300 million into making a game, people will look up. It's an extraordinarily well produced game, but who else can catch up with that? So the idea, also the thing about that is that they also have to release an HD remake every 2 years because they're going for realism. And so when a game like Inside is made, you know, that Inside is going to look great 10, 20, 30 years from now. It will never get old because it's stylized. It's a piece of art. Games like The Last of Us will age very, very rapidly because they're basically victim to the latest in technology. Why are they more successful? Because they have much, much more money and they're supremely well made. And I commend them for it. And I love the new Spider-Man 2 game. It's great, but I'm getting a bit tired of brands dominating everything. Maybe I'm just a rebel without a cause. Who knows?
Next question.
Yeah, no, it's not really a question to rebound with the question previously. I think that there's a saying in French that say l'enfer est pavé de bonnes intentions. Intent is really a difficult thing to. Naughty Dog was really quite a precise example. The last one, A Thief's End, they travel to Madagascar. I don't know if you played it. And everyone's like, Madagascar, this is exact environment of Madagascar. It's really brilliant. The intent was really good. And when there's an interview of studios in Madagascar, Lomé, and they interviewed them and they asked them, what about you? What do you think of this kind of intent? And they said, the game is good. It's a really, really good game, but you don't see people of Madagascar here. You don't exchange with them. You have no point of view of these people. There's no people. You can play it. The game is really. I finished it, and I as a Frenchman in Réunion Island, because I come from it, I did not expect this kind of insight. It's hidden. It's really hidden, and I think that Naughty Dog did not think bad actually from that. No. It's not something that it is intentional.
No, so they just didn't think. It's just like I just don't think Miyamoto thought about. He just wanted to make things delightful. But at the same time, when you have delightful palaces popping up in your cities, and they're gorgeous and they're filled with culture and beautiful paintings and stuff, you don't think about how they got made. You don't think about all the processes that were behind them getting made and arriving there. Only now, 100 years later, are we all openly being critical of this. And with games, we don't even have the time to think, because the mechanics make us do things almost against our own will, because otherwise we lose. The game stops.
So the challenge is mostly hidden. It's a hidden battle, and that's why it's more difficult to fight.
Yes, but it's a beautiful one, because once you start thinking about the intent behind the mechanics, when you think about the meaning behind the mechanics in your game, it makes the game design so much more profound and so much deeper. It's awesome. It's really, really fun to do.
It's time now. I think it will be the final word. Thank you very much, Jörg, and let's continue the battle.
Thank you very much.